Thank you. I like good wordplay, so I'll take your R challenge and I'll go with realness, because my name's not Rebecca, so I had time to think outside of that. We're going to open with a quick activity. For those of you joining virtually, I'll be really extra impressed if you participate as well, and you are welcome to. I invite you in. And it is totally participation by choice. We're going to talk about choice later in this talk, so no pressure. Just think about it. Be aware. What choices are you open to making? I'm going to say good morning, CTI Summiters, as loudly as I can. And I have a mic, so careful. And you're going to say good morning, Daniel, as quietly as you can. Okay? That's what we're going to do. We'll try it. Choose in if you choose to. Good morning, CTI Summiters! I think you can be quieter. Good morning, CTI Summiters! Oh, that's great. Virtual people, I can't hear you at all. You're so quiet. Now I'm going to say, good morning, CTI Summiters, as quietly as I can. You're going to say, good morning, Daniel, as loudly as you can. Here we go. Well, there's a little hesitation. Try it one more time. Really good. It is a good morning, and that made it a little bit better. I'm excited to be here, and I'm also nervous to be here. I'm going to share with you, going to be emotionally transparent. It's something that I'm practicing. I'm on my own journey of combating stress and burnout. I'm in this work with you, not only working with people in cybersecurity, but also as an entrepreneur, also as a speaker. These things are stressful, and I was super nervous. I was so nervous that I didn't know if I'd remember what I was going to say to open, so I made 4 Post-it notes that I put up here, and I haven't looked at them yet, so that's a good sign. I'm also nervous because I'm a social behavioral scientist, and I'm about to tell CTI professionals to add something to your priority list, which I hear is pretty long. And that thing, spoiler alert, is your mental health and well-being, which probably doesn't fit into most of your workflows. It's probably not something you're getting a notification or alert about. So it's an extra thing, and it might be what allows you to do all the other things. The third reason that I'm nervous is because I'm usually asked to talk or present or train about teamwork and leadership in cybersecurity. And that's where the government-funded research that I was part of focused. And because of the initiative here and the work of the organizing committee, I'm reframing and giving my world debut of the focus on the end game of the work I do. The reason that I studied workplace psychology is because I care about how people feel in their work. And the framing today is to help make your lives better at work, and in turn, your lives outside of work. And I haven't presented with this as the upfront focus before. So I'm also in this reframe process. I'm going to say things in a way that I haven't said them before, and that makes me nervous. Before we move into the agenda, I want to take one moment to give a round of applause for SANS and the organizing committee of this summit, and for Capital One, for coming together and putting stress and burnout and mental health and well-being on their priority list for the benefit of everyone here. So let's give them a round of applause. And a lot of gratitude for me for the opportunity to be here and share my expertise. All right, so let's jump in. Here is how the agenda will go. First, an example of combating stress and burnout, and this is going to be a non-cyber, it's going to be a personal example from my life, and I'm doing that because stress and burnout, they are not work experiences. They are human experiences that can happen at work. But we all, of course, know that you have stress and burnout outside of work as well. So I want to help us bridge that gap as we go through today, not only in modeling and demonstrating the things that I'm working on personally to work through that stress and burnout, but also to acknowledge that your work in particular is challenging, and that's something that creates a common bond across those people here and those people joining virtually, and it is not limited to your work. All right, then I'm going to share a little bit of science with you around the research behind combating stress and burnout. We'll talk about the barriers of applying that theory of which there are quite a few, in cybersecurity, and some of them will resonate in CTI in particular, some of them will be more general. And then we're going to end with ways that you can overcome those barriers and really walk you through some takeaways. And I will give you a heads up. They are small things. They are small steps. These are not structural changes. These are not systemic changes to your organization. These are small things that you can take and do. All right, let's start with the example. What could Daniel be talking about? What is a personal experience he has related to combating stress and burnout? And I was thinking to myself, not only in the context of my own journey through this, but also preparing for this talk and thinking about, well, talking about stressful things can be really stressful. So why don't I tell you about a place where I found that I could be my most authentic self, a place where I felt maximum motivation. And that place for me was summer camp. I grew up in the Midwest. I went to summer camp as a camper, and then I got to be on staff at summer camp. I ended up being on staff at summer camp for 10 summers. I don't know if you have context. Who's been to summer camp before? Is anybody? All right, some summer campers. Who has been a staff member at summer camp? All right. So 10 summers means that there were 10 years in my life when I was able to justify to myself, to the adults in my life, to my PhD advisor at one point, that going to camp was a good choice, the best choice for me, and that I was going to get so much out of going that it trumped any other opportunity of internships, of summer courses, of jobs that paid more than summer camp. There are so many barriers to trying to go, and I fought through all of them because the one place I wanted to be was summer camp. The only reason I stopped working at summer camp, the reason I'm not going back to summer camp this summer, is because I decided to divert my attention over to getting a PhD in workplace psychology. And I did get back to camp one summer into grad school, but after that I decided to really commit to something new and started doing research around stress, burnout, motivation, and I ended up on this government contract studying cybersecurity teams and really became immersed in that. That became my new thing where I felt very motivated. But summer camp was an awesome place. And I was thinking, why was summer camp so good for me? Why was it so motivating? Why, when I was at summer camp, yeah, it was 10 weeks of the summer, and I couldn't even tell you how fast it went every time because I was so immersed in that experience. And from my research, I reflected and I realized it falls exactly into this theory that combats stress and burnout. It's called the theory of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation. So this is not extrinsic, external motivation. This is not about rewards and recognition. This is not about the perks of something that you do. This is about your feeling and the motivation that's inside of you to say, I want to keep doing this. And so if I lay this on to, and look through this lens to summer camp, I was realizing it's these three things. It's autonomy, and I'll talk about what each of these are and give you some definitions. It's autonomy, belonging, and competence. If you joined one of our coaching sessions yesterday, I'm sure that this came up in the conversation because this is the foundation that you can then apply to anything that you are doing. Now, I put this graph up to give you a quick visual that these things are not independent of each other. They're very much intertwined. It is not so much, it's a little different than Captain Planet, where you needed like all 5 rings to have Captain Planet show up. It's more like you need some of all of them, but it can be in a whatever ratio happens to play out for you. All right, so let's talk about what each one is. First of all, autonomy. Autonomy is having control over your actions and your choices. And I want you to anchor yourself in your work, whether it's something stressful or some place where you were really motivated. It could be outside of work. think about an experience in your life where you really had a strong emotional experience in terms of how you were motivated to participate or you were demotivated, and think about where these things play out. So control over your choices and actions, and I'll come back to where these apply in cybersecurity, what the barriers are, and then how you can generate this motivation. Another way to think about autonomy is having a sense of ownership. And I say a sense of ownership because we might talk about ownership in terms of like whose name is at the top of a ticket. It might be who's leading a project. It might be that you have a leadership role. And it doesn't have to come from something extrinsic. It can be this sense, this feeling that you have. Oh, I wanted to share autonomy for me at camp was about getting to choose where at camp I worked. There are lots of different departments and units. It was also choosing how I handled challenges and being given the autonomy to create my own programs and giving me the autonomy to choose how I worked with and who I worked with. And all of those choices gave me that sense of ownership. All right, let's move to belonging. Belonging is feeling supported and valued by others. And yes, it is about that reflection of others impacting you, and it's your feeling. So it's your perception. We have perceptions and we have interpretations. Perceptions is what we think is happening, and interpretations are what we think it means. And so you can, I'll preview a little bit of what we're going to talk about, which is how do you change both your perception and or your interpretation in order to receive the value that other people are showing you. And there's another important piece of belonging that I want to emphasize, which is having your own identity. You are your own point of reference for belonging. If you know who you are, what your role is, what your purpose is, to any degree, I don't want to get too existential. If you have some sense of where you fit into the ecosystem, that's a critical piece of being able to understand how other people allow you or welcome you or embrace you in that ecosystem. And we can think of it also about as a sense of connection. One of the most common themes in the work that I do, the research and the consulting and training and coaching that I do in cybersecurity is this piece missing. It's that I'm in isolation. It's that I'm in a silo. It's that I don't feel like I can have anybody I can turn to. Or if I do have people I can turn to, I don't know what to turn to them about. If I know what to turn to them about, I don't know what to say to them about it. All of these things that prevent us from having connection to other people. At camp, for me, camp is built on belonging. It's built on community. Camp comes together for only 6 to 10 weeks, depending on your camp, for the whole year. A common phrase in camping is living 10 for 2. It's being isolated away from all your camp friends for 10 months so that you can get to those 2 months. And part of the magic of camp is being together and in person during that time and the scarcity of it, but also the specialness of it. Where is that missing? Or where are you finding that? How do we generate that? We'll think more on it. The other thing about camp where I really felt my own identity in my sense of belonging is that people called me Shore at camp. That was outside of camp, everybody called me Daniel. Inside of camp, nobody called me Daniel. Maybe it's because there were too many Daniels at camp, but Shore became my whole persona. To the extent my wife thinks it's really weird that when I introduce myself to other people in the camp community, I introduce myself as Shore. Because that is who I am. She's like, tell him your name's Daniel. I'm like, that's not my identity here. I love you, honey. Let's talk about competence. Competence is feeling proficient and effective at what you do. This is a great moment to reframe the wording of this, which is Are you going to feel proficient and effective at everything you do? Unlikely. There is a world in which you're mostly doing things where you do feel this way, but you have a lot of things that come your way that aren't in your control. You need to navigate them. They're brand new. And you might feel like most of the time you are not able to be so proficient and effective at what you do. So then it's about focusing on the times when you do and leveraging those, elevating those moments and those opportunities and those tasks, those projects, those team settings, where you can bring that and use it to generate some of that motivation. Another important piece of this that is really hard in cybersecurity is getting feedback to validate that you're proficient, that you're effective. We'll talk more about some of those barriers in a few moments. And having that sense. So everything I've given you a definition, and I've given you that sense of ownership, that sense of belonging, that sense of connection, that sense of confidence. Sense. What does sense mean in this case? It's the way that you feel. And the way that you feel comes from how you perceive things and how you interpret them. I know that it might feel like oftentimes the way that you feel is out of your control. And it's a totally valid feeling, and it's a very real experience. And I'm going to encourage you to think, are there times when that's not 100% the case? Are there times where you have more ownership and more control than you realize at this moment? And some of the examples, I hope, will spark that for you. So, as I was looking back on camp, competence for me really came from being invited back summer after summer and getting to go and get better at doing something and better and learning more. And I very much was lucky that camp was a place that encouraged me to have a growth mindset, to fail fast, to learn from those opportunities, to repeat things, to iterate. I know later today, Josh is giving a talk on iterate and innovate. And that opportunity to keep learning, it requires resilience. It requires that personal resilience. It requires you to have the opportunities to generate these three components of motivation: autonomy, belonging, and competence. Let's go through some barriers, things that you're probably already thinking about, like, oh, it'd be nice if I could have autonomy. It'd be nice if I could have belonging. It'd be nice if I could feel a sense of competence and get some feedback that validates that. And it's really hard. So the work that I'm sharing with you comes from my PhD research. And in particular, I spent 5 years on research that was funded by DHS, as well as a couple European governments, the Swedish and the Dutch governments. And over those 5 years, we were tasked with studying the social behavioral drivers of effective teamwork, primarily in CSIRTs and SOCs, all the way from entry, frontline, tier 1, to the C-suite. And put together, I'm happy to share it with you. There's a whole compendium of our research that was funded by DHS to print, and maybe we can find a way to share it through resources as well. The challenge with that is that it was a 300-page book of the results of that research. And that was the end of the research. That was where the funding ended. So that book contained the results from those 5 years, from 56,000 person hours of work to identify those drivers, to identify what these cybersecurity professionals were experiencing in terms of how they communicate, how they collaborate, how they respond, how they recover, how they build resilience. And one of the things that was missing from that was the human-centered focus, because we were still at the organizational level. We were still really looking at it from the top down, and the top could have been from the board to the C-suite, or from the leaders of a government agency. It also could have been simply at the department or even the team level. But it was still a very top-down approach. And so the work that I was doing outside of this on motivation and thinking about how to drive the feeling that people have to feel valued in their work, paired with this perfectly because it came from the individual experience and was a bottom-up approach. After those 5 years, after that book, it was very clear to me and the rest of the team that not a lot of people were reading the book. Damn it. So I asked myself, what are we going to do about it? Daniel, sure. And I looked around and everyone else had moved on to other projects. I was like, no, I'm not moving away from this. I really believe in this community. I really think that this expertise could help people in cybersecurity a lot. And if nobody's going to read the book, I'm going to take everything that's in it, and I'm going to turn it into something that people can use. And so that's what I've spent the last 7, coming up on 8 years doing, because it felt like the right thing to do at that time. And as I fully immersed myself individually instead of in this big encompassing team that was kind of a protective envelope of, oh, we're coming in as part of DHS research and we're with George Mason University and we've got these other partners, public, private, and we're here and we're doing research, then it was just me. Then it was just Daniel Shore coming in because I want to help. And that was a daunting experience, and it was a place where I was really trying to find motivation. It was a place where I hit a lot of barriers because this work wasn't really making sense to a lot of people, and it wasn't fitting on that priority list. And I kept doing it. I kept doing it because, quite frankly, I had found my voice in this space. I had taken a lot of autonomy to say, this is what I'm going to do. And I can thank my grandfather for having the entrepreneurial DNA that got passed down to me. But I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And as I started to do this work on my own, just as Daniel Shore, going into cybersecurity environments and doing what I could to share the research and help and figure out, is it training, is it coaching, is it consulting, is it just being here and being an extra voice in the room or an extra ear to help listen, I started to feel a sense of belonging. I started to feel this connection. And then I started to get some feedback that when I was able to get into a space and help and share this expertise, that it was being well received. And that started to build my confidence. And it wasn't so easy, but I developed, and a word that I hear a lot in cybersecurity is I developed a toughness to keep trying to figure it out. And slowly, I was able to make change. All I wanted was for me to go from being, all right, research ended, I think this is really valuable, I'm going to keep doing it. And people from the project were very supportive, but they had moved on to other things and where there was other funding. And I was like, no, I'm going to figure this out. So as I put this motivational lens back on, I thought, what did that toughness do? And it actually inhibited me from doing some of the things that I wanted to do, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Let's get into what the research has indicated. Barriers to motivation. We'll start with the barriers to your sense of ownership. So these are barriers to autonomy, and at the end, you're going to see it kind of go through the list, and at the end, everything will be highlighted, and it'll show the full list if you want to take a picture of it, or it'll be in the slides that we share online. So I'm going to go through, and you'll see some of them fade out, some of them bold in. But first of all, an obvious barrier to autonomy is being inundated with regulations and policies. And this need to comply with an inordinate number of compliance regulations, the need for high accuracy reporting in a really urgent setting. And when you're rushing and you're trying to figure out exactly what to do, and all you can do is focus on getting the bare minimum out the door, it's really hard to feel a sense of autonomy. The amount of work that is required by you to be in a reactive space, to see what happens and then respond to it, makes it very hard to be autonomous, because autonomy rarely comes in the space of receiving something and then reacting to it, because you didn't choose your starting point. The high stakes, high pressure, the constant urgency, paired with that, is what I would say one of the most extreme environments for blocking autonomy. And we know that the stress and burnout levels in cybersecurity are among the highest, if not the highest, of occupational industries. And when you put on that some of these other barriers that we'll talk about in terms of, like, who are you turning to when you need help? How are you getting validation that what you're doing is working? These other senses, this idea of belonging, this idea of competence will come back into this full circle. And lastly is, I know identity management is a term in cybersecurity. It also is a challenge in cybersecurity on the human side, which is, where is the boundary? Where does your work stop? And where do you come back to being just you? Where do you draw the line between finishing that research project and just being Daniel Shore? It's not clear where that is, and it's not clear who's going to support you in finding it. There is a choice to be made. And again, this is not an easy thing to navigate, especially me on stage, you there. Would love to talk to anybody who's interested more about it, but, like, what is the choice that you can make? What's the story you're telling yourself that you have no choice? And where can we find some light through the cracks of that story to say, you know what? There is this time when I can make that choice. There is this time when I can say, I'm not on call. I'm not available. And some of you have found those times. Some of you are still trying to find those times, and some of you may believe that those times aren't possible. And that's totally valid. The work that you do is incredibly challenging, and I don't know anybody else who goes to work and is thinking about adversaries. That's not the thing that most people are thinking about. And that's why I want to be here to support you in thinking, what does it look like? What do you have control over? And where can you draw that line? Just once, for one moment, for one task, one project. Where can you say no? And if you can't say no, where can you say yes, and by this date, not by that date? Again, we'll go through autonomy, belonging, and competence barriers. Then we'll get to ways to overcome those. All right, and there's the full list. Cameras out, everybody. This list, by the way, is not exhaustive. It is comprehensive, but not exhaustive. And there are other barriers as well. Belonging. What are the barriers to connecting, to feeling valued by others, and to creating your own sense of identity within that context? Egocentrism, which people often hear as egotism or egotistical. It's not that. Egocentrism is being wired to focus on yourself first. It's a pretty natural wiring. It tends to be stronger in cybersecurity, in part because of how many people come into cybersecurity, which is, I was individually interested. Now I'm going to individually learn some things. Now I'm going to get individually certified. Now I'm going to get a job where I'm asked to work with other people. What? That doesn't compute. That doesn't align with how I've been wired to think about the work that I'm doing. In fact, it often is very misaligned. Working with other people does not line up with a superhero mentality or a lone wolf mindset. If you aren't encouraged to work with other people, it could be because you don't want to. It could be because you have terrible past experiences working with other people. It could be because you have these stories. Some of them have been very validated up to this point, that working with other people takes more time, that working with other people requires me to rely on them to do what they say they're going to do, that working with other people means that I'm going to have to share the success and the credit for the work that I'm doing. That is true. And I'll invite you to think about a cost-benefit analysis of doing that. Because none of those statements include the benefits of working with other people. And so when you have a zero trust mindset, and the industry is built on that, though I know that is shifting in terms of how it's defined and the validity of it, but those types of things, and then you add in that many of you work remotely, and you have this virtual work, and you're physically in a silo, you're physically by yourself, the barriers are strong. What's it going to take to overcome this? Well, one, we're going to have to do some incremental change. It's not going to be a radical shift. And we're going to talk more about what that looks like. And it's also going to require some sense of working together on this as a community. When you are lacking this, when you are in isolation, and you experience some of the really tough emotions from traumatic events, from frustrating events, from challenging events, and you start to feel shame, guilt, embarrassment, futility, and you feel those things alone, that's really, really challenging. And it is not your fault. It is not a bad thing. It is not a stupid thing that you've ended up there. It is simply the real thing that has happened. And we get to think about what are the choices to make to shift that, to change that, to take some ownership, to get into a sense of belonging. Barriers to competence. Constant work and changing tasks. It is hard to be good at something when you don't know what you're supposed to be good at. It is hard to be good at something when you've done a ton of training and then you're asked to do something totally different, when your portfolio expands well beyond the thing that you were hired to do. And then you're doing the things, and it's really hard to measure how successful they are. And those metrics aren't clear. And it's not standardized. And you have a bunch of different stakeholders and people have different goals and outcomes. And you're trying to figure out, are we meeting everybody's needs, everybody's wants, everybody's demands? What is my performance? Can be really challenging. And when you're constantly in go mode and reacting and figuring out and problem solving, when do you get time to celebrate those wins? And we're going to talk about, in a moment, defining wins, because we also can take control and redefine what a win is. And you're doing all those things, and the feedback is either that was good, that was bad. What about, the times when you could be doing lessons learned, when you could stop and slow down to do an after-action review? And then, who here has been trained on giving and receiving feedback? Anyone in the room? Okay, 4, 5? Not everybody in the room. Giving feedback and receiving feedback are skills. There's training for that. It's human-centered training, and it's available. It's possible. It's a thing. And if you don't have it, it's not your fault that you don't have it. And we get to acknowledge that almost nobody's trained on it. So how are we supposed to get good at it? And how are we supposed to receive and give it and build that sense of confidence? Competing priorities, notifications, constant, 10 different platforms. Where am I supposed to look? Who am I supposed to listen to first? I have 4 leaders, all who are my supervisor. 3 of them don't get along. I didn't know that would hit so close to home. And imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, that feeling, I should be able to do this. I should be able to take everything on. I should have all the right answers. I had this preparing for today, reframing around mental health and well-being. It was like, I talk about teamwork and leadership. Well, I should be able to talk about mental health and well-being. That's what ultimately comes from this, and reducing stress and burnout and building motivation. And I haven't talked about that as the focus of any of my work in front of an audience like this. But I should have the answers. I should know what I'm doing. And I don't. I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of research. I have a lot of lived experience and consulting experience. And I'm giving you the most and the best that I can. And it still is going to have room to grow. There's still more to learn, to say, to give, to think about. Let's get into ways you can overcome these barriers. Whew, it's a much better way to end the talk. That'll be good. I'm glad I did this. Oh, but then there's this. Change is a process, and the process doesn't always start with change. Starts with awareness, starts with acknowledgement, starts with some emotion. Could be starting with frustration, anger, futility, shame, guilt, embarrassment. It could start with hope. It could start with optimism. It could start with connection. Before change can happen, we've got to figure out where we're starting from. That means that we're going from unconscious habits to raising some conscious awareness about where we're at. I'll briefly share that a personal anecdote, which is, in my life, friends and family know that I am so good at cutting it so close for flights. Like the number of times my name is said over the loudspeaker and I show up to hear it in person, chef's kiss. And in June, and then again in November, I missed flights. The first 2 flights I've missed. Both were work flights. Both were paid for by the client. Both were not good. Both got rebooked. One for free. One for, well, rebooked is wrong. I had to buy another ticket. And it was international. Yeah. What does that mean for me? My identity included being someone who cuts it close and gets on there on time for flights. And then I didn't. Do I say, you know what? Those were aberrations. Those were just one-offs. Fuck it. I can make the next flight. No, because these are work flights. And I have a work partner. I have Zach, who's right here doing the coaching with me, doing the workshops. We've been working together for several years. And I had to tell Zach that I missed the flight. One of the flights was going to be the first flight we got to take together internationally from the same airport, because I just moved to the Boston area where Zach lives. And I was texting that earlier that day. I was like, Zach, we get to take our first flight together. And then I had to text Zach, no, we don't. Zach was like, I know, I'm on the plane and you're not. I really took stock and I thought, all right, I'm going to use this as an example in the work that I'm doing and the training that I run, because this is real. My identity is being challenged. What am I going to do about it? Well, the next flight, I got to the airport 2 hours before boarding. And I felt awful about it. I was like, what a loser. How anxious am I as a traveler? No. What? That doesn't make any sense. I hate this. And then I had an idea. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to have a full meal before I get on that flight. And then I'm going to still have time, because luckily my Chase credit card has lounge access. I'm going to find a lounge. I don't care if it's in another terminal. I don't know why they don't have a lounge in every terminal, but I'm going to go to where there is one. I'm going to make this good. I'm going to take ownership. I'm going to get really competent at getting to airports on time. I'm going to use Zach as my accountability partner. I'm going to own this choice. I'm going to swallow my pride, because, man, was there some resistance coming up for me. Let's talk about what you can do. This is what I did. Got out of my own way. Ways to build autonomy. Identify and set a boundary for a day. 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute. Something incremental that can change. Choose emotional transparency with someone you trust. I have the good fortune of trusting all of you today and sharing where I'm coming from. Find that one person. It could be someone at work. It doesn't have to be. Start to build some new skills, which ultimately will build new habits. Tap back into something you're excited about. One of the conversations I had yesterday was, I keep getting tasks, projects, requests on things that I'm not excited about, and I have to do them. Okay. Also set aside some short period of time to reconnect with what you love doing. Separate your work and living space just a little bit more. Don't eat at your desk. I don't know what it looks like, but do something to make that shift. Slow down for 5 minutes during a rush. I know it feels like every minute counts. And the example that comes to mind that Zach has given me is, you don't have money to pay for a new water heater until your water heater breaks. And then all of a sudden, you've got all the time and money you need to get it fixed because it's a necessity. If you prioritize yourself, even for 5 minutes, take that time and prioritize. You can have it. Slow down to speed up. Doing that can help. That cost-benefit analysis, slowing down can help you get through all the other things. Ways to build belonging. One person, deepen a connection. Don't go meet someone new. You can, and that might not be your entry point. Get to know people before you need people. In the research we did, the malware team and monitoring teams weren't talking to PR and communications until there was a crisis. And all of a sudden, they needed each other, but they didn't know each other. Where can you make those connections? Ask for someone's perspective. Be curious. Open yourself up. You don't have to share anything except your time and a listening ear, and hear what they're thinking. Share a success and a lesson learned. Be Clark Kent for a day. It doesn't mean you're not being Superman. It just means that you're not acting like Superman. You don't have to wear the cape all the time. But it doesn't mean that you're not still a superhero. It doesn't mean you're still not doing good work. That's my sense of belonging. That's Zach. I made his picture really big because I thought it would embarrass him a little bit. Then I made it really small, just to show him how intentional it was. Find someone to have accountability with. Then I went back a slide. Then the talk went 40 minutes over. The last piece, ways to build competence. Appreciate the early victories. Success happens along the way. Celebrate the process. Celebrate the first thing you do in the process. Don't wait till the end. Celebrate the middle of the process. Don't wait until the end. Find things to do that can make you feel good, even if it feels forced, even if it feels like, is this real? Make it real. Ask for support. Take time to make a good skill more good. Shift from failure, I failed at that, to a setback. Ooh, we're going to have to Try that again. We're going to have to overcome that a little bit harder. To next time. Next time, what are we going to do? What's our lesson learned? This time it didn't go well. Okay. We're all in this together here. Let's think about what that looks like. And lastly is to own and share how you're feeling. Change is a process. Process doesn't always start with change. You might need to check in at how you're feeling. And that's okay. One quick example. I keep a professional journal every day. I write down the things that I did. Some are good, some are bad, some don't mean much. I had a phone call, I had a good conversation. Oh, I got a contract, I did a training, I made a phone call. These little things. It's an example from my life. All right. Wrapping up, some other incremental action steps you can take. Take advantage of the summit. I quickly jotted down that autonomy, belonging, and competence are in this space. Choose what you do today. Choose the sessions you go to. Choose how you show up. Connect with other people. Build a sense of belonging. Connect with one person. Really find time to talk to someone. I went to a conference a couple months ago. It's a conference I've gone to year over year. And I'm always trying to figure out who can I work with, how can we work together. This time I just went and I decided to just catch up. It was very rewarding. And you're building your competence with skills. There is a Mental Health and Cybersecurity Foundation. This is the QR code to the LinkedIn group. I'll put it in the slides that go online and a link. Zach and I are doing on-site coaching, 10:15 to 12:15, and a leadership workshop. And please connect with me. I would love to stay connected and be part of this community even more, including connecting with you. And on LinkedIn, Daniel Shore, PhD, is the way to find me. And be kind to yourself. Please. And you're welcome.